Kohelet of the book of Ecclesiastes. We are discussing, or we're right in the middle of his time for this and a time for that. And we discussed last week what he's trying to do with this, and that's really a continuation of his findings that he started to express at the end of the last chapter. That's again, he's on this quest to figure out what is happiness and how are you supposed to experience happiness from the physical world, right? He concludes that there has to be some happiness that we could derive from it, right? It's not here for nothing. So what is the path towards that happiness? And he ended off again the last chapter with saying that with his first kind of glimpse into what is happiness from this world, particularly in the fact that a person has to be focused on what they can control as opposed to what they cannot control. And again, that's a common theme in the search for happiness is you can only find happiness, or you can only expect to find happiness with those things you can control. And then he started talking about these times. And we said that part of his idea with these times is saying that sometimes some things, there's a period where you expect things to happen. Then there's things that happen in the middle of nowhere. And those things are quite literally, those are things you cannot control, right? You can expect the weather to be a certain way in a certain season. But when it turns out that it's not, and a snowstorm shows up in August is pushing it, but if a snowstorm shows up in April, it's surprising and it throws you off. So being ready, you can't be ready really for those types of situations, and not to expect happiness in finding those places, rather to find happiness specifically where you do exert some level of control. And that's where he starts to talk about what are these surprising things that happen. And with each one of these, we're understanding that there's going to be a certain lesson to the path of happiness from each one of these. I promised last time that I would show you a picture of what it looked like if you would write it out on a parchment. As it is, just to clarify, most shuls, if you go to a synagogue nowadays on Sukkot or on Shmini Atzeret, when we read Kohelet, you will likely not find them reading from an actual parchment scroll. That just happens to be because they're very uncommon. It's not a high priority for scribes to work on. And it actually throws in a couple of halachic issues, whether you're supposed to make a bracha on it or not. So that's just why it's pretty hard to find. So I'm going to show you a picture that I, through my connections, I actually asked a group on Facebook to help me find this. And I was able to locate what it looks like in the actual on parchment. So before we actually get into the text this week, I want to show you what that looks like, if you don't mind. And we're jumping to the share screen. Hopefully everyone could see this right here. And you see, so this is a very special style of writing. This is what we do in a Sefer Torah. Also, this is what's called Kitav Ashurit. It's a special way of writing the Hebrew alphabet. And you find over here, we have this. This is where the third chapter begins, right there at that space. As I mentioned before, the chapters are not our chapters. The Christians came up with the chapters. We happen to use them for easy reference, but they're not how we would necessarily break up the book ourselves. And that's where you find Lakol Zman. All right, we saw that last week. For everything, there's a time. Ve'et lechol chefetz tachat hashamayim. And there's a period, or there's a sudden occasion of every item under the sun. And here we have a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot from planting. And actually, I was talking to Steve Meyerowitz on Shabbat, and he pointed out a very interesting idea over here, which really goes to something that Myra was asking last week, is the way that this is set up. It's in two columns. And as opposed to the Song of the Sea, if you were to look at the Song of the Sea, it's kind of written in a brick on brick setup. You have 3 half lines and 2 half lines and 3 half lines and 2 half lines. So it's like how you would pile up bricks. And Steve was saying how that's similar to the way you would build a building. You want something to last, you build it like that. But something that you don't expect to last, something that could fall apart very quickly, you build like this, right? It's just bricks on top of each other. I think that goes, as I was thinking about it after I spoke to you, Steve, I think that's kind of what one of the things that he's trying to show here is all these things can fall apart in a second. These are not things we necessarily have control over. So there's places to find happiness, but these are things that can fall apart at a moment's notice. You know, your whole world can be turned upside down from ledet and lamut, right? From birth and death, from planting and from uprooting, from, you know, as we said last week, from killing and healing and breaking barriers and building barriers. And so that I think that quite perfectly speaks to our point that we're talking about, is that this is something that very much like a building that's not built well. Sometimes the structures that we expect our happiness to come from, they can actually fall apart also. And that's, again, him pointing out that there are things that we cannot control. Okay, so thank you for bringing that up to me, Steve, and thank you for challenging me to find this. So this helps us kind of visualize this a little better. As it is, we're right over here, that 8 over there, but I'm going to jump into our typical, the way we read it over here. And that is, can everyone see this? This is in the Sefaria now. Okay, thank you. Let me just go down to the right one. We are starting here from verse 4.
So, Rabbi, if we just go back to the script, there was something else interesting that I saw.
Okay. Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, there's 2 of the lines where there's no crowns on the letters.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, there's actually a few of them.
3.
If you notice. Yeah.
There's a few, yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting. The way the crowns, there are seven letters, I believe. Yeah, 7 Hebrew letters that take crowns on them. You'll notice them over here: the shin, the ayin, the tet, the gimel, the tzadi, and the nun. And there's also the zayin, which doesn't show up here. I think that's all of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think that's all. Yeah, so that's the simple answer. There's probably something much deeper over there. We know that Rabbi Akiva, the original one, not me, the original Rabbi Akiva was famous for his ability to learn piles and piles of laws and ideas from each crown on each letter in the Torah. So unfortunately, I do not have that ability. But there's definitely much to say about that, I'm sure. Okay, so we're going to jump into our text over here. Again, this is, chapter 3, verse 4. We go through this in the original Hebrew to get a more specified translation of the words. Okay, and that's, again, we're starting over here. 8 livkot. There's a time for crying. Okay, the shoresh there being beit chaf hey bacha. Okay, the hey has the ability to drop off of a word when it's in a certain system. So again, 8 livkot, there's a time to cry. The 8 lischok, and there's also time to laugh. Okay, sichok are very closely related to tzichok, like Yitzchak, like our forefather Yitzchak, right? So that's the idea of laughing. There's a time to cry and a time to laugh. 8 sifod, a time to eulogize, to speak about those who have passed, which is usually we would consider that usually a sad thing. The 8 rakod, there's also a time to dance. Okay, rakod, again, rakida, that shoresh means to dance or to bounce around, which basically means dancing in this case. So again, let me read that all together as one. 8 livkot, a time to cry. V8 lischok, a time to laugh. 8 sifod, a time to eulogize. V8 rakod, and a time to dance. Okay, so these are 2 sets of opposites, usually considered opposites, and they are very interconnected, right? We usually would assume these to be similar times. The time to cry, we would usually assume to be the same as the time to eulogize. And the time to laugh would it usually be the same time as the time to dance. Okay, obviously dancing is a little different than laughing, and laughing is a little different than dancing. They're not exactly the same thing. And of course, we would be able to break them up. There would be times when the some of the emotions would overlap with actions that wouldn't necessarily correspond in our mind, right? You could sometimes be happy and eulogizing, as we've spoken in the past, over the looking back at people's lives and a completed task and being happy over it. And obviously there's a time when you could be crying and dancing, right? Those things do happen, but typically we look at these as corresponding groups. So time to cry equals a time to eulogize, and a time to laugh is similar or is the same thing as a time to dance. And in fact, that is how the sages look at it over here. They say actually a fascinating thing, and I want to point out something that they say in the words that they use. I'm not going to bring it up in front of us, but the sages over here, and it's brought down in some of the commentaries, they say that just the way they word it is a little interesting. They say that the time to cry is during mourning, right? M-O-U-R, right? Mourning. And the Eit L'Schok, the time to laugh, is afterwards. Okay. And similarly, the Eit Sefod, the time for eulogizing, is again during mourning, and the Eit Rakod, the time for dancing, is afterwards. But attention, they don't say in another situation. They don't say by a wedding. They don't say anything like that. They say, well, yeah, you cry and you eulogize while mourning, and you laugh and dance after mourning. And that's a very strange thing. Why would they say it like that? Why would they point out that the time for laughing and dancing is after mourning, right? That's quite literally how they put it. Even we wouldn't usually think of that as a time to laugh and dance. I think they're trying to, again, kind of show us a little bit about how we should be understanding these verses. And this verse in particular is that sometimes the same item, the same thing that's bringing you sadness is the thing that's going to bring you happiness. Okay. So again, we have this idea that we're crying and we're eulogizing after the passing of a person. And, we think back on them and we cry, we feel bad. We talk about the great things that they did, but there comes a time when that same process should also lead us towards happiness, towards laughter and dancing. Again, an interesting idea that they're bringing up over here. Rashi says a similar thing. Rashi, again, the king of the commentators, Rashi over here says, when do you cry? On Tisha B'Av, on the 9th day of Av, right? The day of tragedy, right? When the temples were destroyed and many other calamities befell the Jewish people. And when do you laugh? He says, well, we have a verse that tells us, we sing it, many of us sing it on Shabbat right before benching. We say, Azimale Sechok Pinu, right? That then our mouths will be full with happiness or with laughter. Okay, that's referring to the times of the redemption. So the Tisha B'Av, the day of the destruction of the temple, is a time to cry, and the redemption is a time to laugh. Now, redemption can't happen without destruction, in our case, right? In the case of the national story of the Jewish people, we need to go into exile to be redeemed from exile, okay? And so you find the same idea over here where the thing that's bringing us sadness is the thing that's bringing us happiness, okay? And I think this is one of the lessons that King Solomon's trying to bring over here. Again, another brick on our road towards happiness is understanding that sometimes the things that you think are for your discomfort and are not helping you and are the sad things, those are sometimes the very things that may bring you salvation, happiness in the future, okay? There's a fascinating halacha, a Jewish law, that we have blessings for everything, right? Famously, Jews have blessings for everything, right? You walk down the street, you got a blessing for it, I'm sure, right? Some way or another. So one of the things that we make a blessing on is when somebody passes away. We say, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet, right? And if it's actually a parent or something like that, you would say the full bracha with the name of Hashem, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Dayan Ha'emet, right? Blessed are you, the true judge, okay? The judge or the judge of truth. And then the halacha is that if the person also happens to receive an inheritance from the passing of that person, you would say, Baruch HaTov HaMeitiv, that Hashem is good and does good things for people. So at the same time that you're making this blessing of sadness of the fact that the person has died, you're also at the same moment make a blessing, thanking Hashem for having an inheritance coming into an inheritance. So again, a fascinating idea that the thing that causes us mourning is the thing that grants us redemption, that grants us comfort and solace. So I think that's one of the ideas here. Another brick on the road to happiness is this idea that sometimes the thing that we are perceiving as the bad thing is actually the source of our salvation. Okay. And again, on a national level, we see this. On a personal level, we see this. And obviously sometimes it takes getting all the way through to the end of the story to finally see that all those things that we thought were to our detriment were actually working in our benefit. And then again, that takes a certain godly eye to see that, or an eye to turn towards seeing God's hand in things. But the idea is the same, whether we want to focus on that or not. The path towards happiness includes realizing that that some things that we think are not good for us turn out to be good for us in the end, and sometimes we have to wait to see the rest of the story. Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Can the juxtaposition also not tell us that mourning is not forever? Mourning has to come to an end.
That's good. I like that also. I did not see that originally myself, but thank you for pointing that out. I think you're totally right with that. That there's definitely an aspect that what he's trying to say over here is definitely, that there is a time to cry, but that time also ends. I really appreciate that thought, Steve. And thank you, Jacob, also for your for your comment. I think Steve's got a major point over here, which is that there's a time to cry, but that time ends. So like he's saying, so again, going with what the rabbis say, that the time to laugh is after the time to cry, meaning that there comes a time when crying has to be put aside and laughter has to come again. I think that's a really, really fascinating point, and definitely something I think we should make a point to explore more in the future. Okay. We're going to move on to the next verse now, verse 5. This is an interesting one, just because the way the verses, the words are written. It's not a common phrasing. So in fact, a lot of the commentators, they just work on translating what the words are, but none of these are common words, really not that common words throughout Tanakh in general. So we have 8 lahashlich avanim. We have a time to throw stones, okay? Ve'et knos avanim. And we have a time to gather stones. 8 lachavok. There's a time to hug. Ve'et lerchok mechabek. And there are times to distance from hugging, okay? So here we have, again, the verse telling us 2 groups of things. And here it's not so clear how they correspond to each other. But again, we have, let me read it all together again. 8 lahashlich avanim, a time to throw stones or to throw away stones. Ve'et knos avanim, and a time to gather stones. 8 lachavok, a time to hug. Ve'et lerchok mechabek, and a time to distance from hugging. Okay, and that's also an interesting thing. We wouldn't necessarily think of the opposite of hugging as distancing from hugging. I could think of, throwing stones would be a good, opposite of hugging. But that's not what he does here. He doesn't make those the corresponding things. He says to hug and to distance from hugging. When I was prepping this verse, first of all, one thing stands out to me: lahashlich. We run it there. The shoresh over here, the root word over there is that shin lamed chaf, okay, which means to throw, or to throw away, from you, okay. And it's actually a fascinating thing because the same shoresh, but with the other cha sound, right? So this is lahashlich with the chaf. If you have lahashlich with the chet, it means also to send away. So we have the same kind of word meaning pushing away, but here it's specifically to throw something away. I just find that interesting that you have to, whenever you see the word shalach in the Torah, you have to take a second and figure out, is that the one with the chaf or is that the one with the chet? And they have such a very, very small difference in meaning, but there is a slight difference in meaning between the two of them. If somebody speaks with a Sephardi accent, they would actually pronounce them a little differently than each other. Ashkenazim don't seem to have that tradition, so we just pronounce them the same exact way. But people who are raised with a Sephardi accent would pronounce it a little differently. One would be lahashlich and one would be lahashlich, with a kind of a softer guttural sound. So anyway,
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Can you give an example of two phrases that use the different spelling and the subtle differences in their meaning?
Yeah. So for example, here is an example of lahashlich, meaning to throw away, to push away, as opposed to, let me think. We have numerous examples, particularly throughout in the stories of the Torah. You've got so as Jacob, our forefather Jacob, not you Jacob, as our forefather Jacob is on his way back home from the house of Lavan, and he realizes that he's going to have to bump into Esav, his brother, at some point. It says Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim, and Yaakov, Jacob, sends angels. So that's sending with a chet, meaning it's a kind of you maintain control over the item. I would say that's part of the difference over here. With shalach, with a chet, you maintain some level of control. Similarly, Moses is commanded, shalach lecha anashim, you should send out spies for you to go spy out the land of Israel, again, with that fatal mistake that he made at the beginning of their 40 years, or the second year in the desert, that led to them being there for the next 38 years. So again, you have over there, the idea was for Moses to maintain a control over that group of people, lashlich with a chet, shalach lecha. So I guess, again, in the same way, it's more actually an idea of agency when we have it with a chet. So, and that's actually a term that we use throughout the Talmud and other places. We talk about making a shliach, making a messenger to go do something on your behalf, an agent. So that's with a chet. Here, lahashlich, again with a chaf, seems to be sending away, but releasing control over something. Just an interesting, it's really just a grammatical thing, but it's interesting to point out that two words that sound nearly identical, but they happen to have, there's a slight difference in the meaning. So they're homophones and nearly synonyms, but not quite. So again, just an interesting fact.
Yasher koach, that was lovely. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So one thing that stood out to me over here is stones. Stones are items that are inherently purposeless. Right? A stone has no innate purpose, inherent purpose, which is why actually on Shabbat we are not allowed. You're not really supposed to move a stone. It's muktzah. Right, we know the term. You may be familiar with the term muktzah, something you're not allowed to move on Shabbat. Right, so stones are, by in and of themselves, by nature, they are a muktzah item. You're not supposed to move them on Shabbat because they have no purpose. So in that sense, a stone only has a purpose once you give it a purpose. If it has no purpose, it is a stumbling block. Right, it's this thing that gets in your way. It's a destructive item. So an interesting idea over here is that he's saying that there's a time to throw away stones, to throw away things that have no purpose, but there's a time to gather those things that seemingly have no purpose and to give them purpose, a time to gather stones. Kenos over here, this shoresh is kuf nun samech, which means to gather in. Okay, and that's actually a pretty common term. Knesset, for example, the Knesset in Israel is a gathering. The Israeli parliament. So that's the shoresh over here. Kenos, a time to gather stones. So there's a time we have things in our lives that are inherently useless. There's a time to just get rid of those and say it's time to purge those things from us. but there's also a time to take them, take account of them, take stock of them, and give them purpose and declare a purpose for those items. Gather the stones. You're going to build a building, you need the stones. You're going to make a road, you need those stones, right? So again, they can have a purpose as long as you give them a purpose. But there are some items, again, that don't have a purpose, and they're actually bringing you down. And there's a time to throw those things away. And again, throw, like we're saying, throw without maintaining agency or some control over it. Throw them away and get them out. We're kind of reminded of the Marie Kondo method of house cleaning, right? Where, does this spark joy? If it doesn't, get rid of it, right? Minimalism, right? So that's kind of what he's saying over here, is that there are items that don't have purpose. You either got to give them purpose, or you got to get them out of your way. They're stumbling blocks. Again, that's how I'm putting it. There are things that you're going to be tripping over all the time, and it's not helping you. And then you have the corollary over here, which is a time to hug and a time to distance yourself from hugging. Okay, rachok means distant. Okay, so a time to distance yourself from hugging. So hugging is our interpersonal connection. Okay, it's a way that we go ahead and we make a connection with another person on a physical level. It's very funny because I found it interesting that looking through the commentaries, they all have to work hard to explain what is a chibuk, what is a hug, right? Because the word is not a common word throughout Tanakh. So they explain that a guy goes and puts his two arms around the other person. That's a chibuk, right? So it's actually a word that it's a funny word to have to translate. We use it in modern Hebrew. It's a very common word. Chibuk, right, is a hug, right? But here we find that we are given this word as, we're using the word chibuk of lachabok, to hug, as saying interpersonal connection, creating physical and interpersonal connections with other people. And now you can start to see the corollary. When you see that, you say, people also, let's put this in a nice way, there are many people who or relationships with other people are also things that may not be inherently useful. They may be inherently useless, right? Obviously, it's always nice to have connections with other people. We've all learned that the hard way from COVID, right? Times when we've been totally cut off from other people, and it's hard to be cut off like that. But at the same time, there's also, I think what he's saying is that we have to question our connections with other people. There is a time to connect with other people, and there's also time or people that are better to distance ourselves from, right? Some people they're just bad. They're not bad. We don't look at people as bad, but they're bad for me, let's say, right? They're not a healthy relationship, and I have to work hard to distance myself from that. And then there's other people that I'm naturally distanced from, and I need to make myself work hard to go and hug them. It happens to be I'm not a big hugger, right? You go into a synagogue on Shabbat, you'll find that there's two groups of people. There's the huggers and the not huggers. I tend to not be a hugger, right? I had to push myself to start shaking hands again after COVID. I thought that was my excuse for the rest of time. I won't even have to shake hands anymore, but unfortunately, it's very hard to reject a handshake. Yeah, okay, if you're able to avoid it, I envy you. But as it is, I'm not a hugger. So, I see this verse, I'm like, yes, of course, there's plenty of times to avoid hugging, and there's plenty of times that's our go-to. But in fact, King Solomon's reprimanding me too, and he's saying, no, there are times to hug also. There are times for both of these things. There's times, and again, times they happen suddenly, spontaneously. Sometimes the time is to hug, and you don't even realize that time is coming. Sometimes the time is to make that personal connection, and you don't even see it coming. And sometimes you don't even see it coming, but that person that you think you should be getting close to, or you've spent your entire life being close to, sometimes that person is actually not healthy for us. So the way I see this is, again, King Solomon telling us another brick on the path towards happiness is we have to both build and challenge our boundaries. Okay, we have boundaries. Everyone hopefully has natural boundaries, right? But we have to build those boundaries. We also have to challenge those boundaries. We have to take account and uh, take inventory of our boundaries that we've put up and say, is this an appropriate boundary? Or is this actually not an appropriate thing? Is this something that we should question and we should actually try to reach out to this person more or try to get closer to this person? Again, let's talk from a purely selfish perspective. It's better for me to be close to this person. Okay. Obviously, there's a whole nother question when you get into, is it better for that person that I be close to them? That's a whole nother, that's a chesed question, right? That's a better way to act. That's not what we're talking about over here. We're talking about personally for myself. Sometimes I'm losing out on happiness because I'm not allowing myself to get close to somebody, or again, I'm maintaining some useless things that are not helping me, right? So again, the time I should throw away my stones, and times that I should take my stones and I should give them purpose. Times that I should be reaching out to other people and making that connection. And again, times that I should really be avoiding that connection because it's not healthy for me. Okay. Okay, that is verse 5. I think we have time for just one more verse over here, verse 6. Okay, and that is verse 6 begins like this. Again, chapter 3, verse 6. He says, 8 levakesh. There's a time to search out for something. Ve'et la'abed, and a time to lose something. 8 lishmor, a time to guard things. Ve'et lahashlich, and again, a time to throw things away. Same word showing up over here that we had over here on the last verse, a time to throw things away. So again, a time to search out things and a time to lose things. Okay, sorry, let me read the Hebrew, I'm sorry. 8 lavakesh, a time to search things out. The 8 labed, a time to lose items. 8 lishmor, a time to hold on to things or to guard them. The 8 lahashlich, and a time to throw things away. Okay, again, this word shemor can mean both to guard physically, to actually like stand guard over something. It could also mean to just hold on to something. It works in both ways. It's the same idea that you're maintaining some level of ownership or control over something. And again, over here we have this eight lavakesh, which means to search for something, and la'abed, which means to lose something. Okay, and here I find a fascinating idea over here in the fact that we start not with losing, but we start with trying to find something. You would think if you were to set up the verse properly, obviously he did, but if you wanted to set up the verse, in my mind, the way you would set up the verse is sometimes you lose things and then you go looking for them, right? So sometimes you throw things away, and then sometimes there are things that you should actually keep with you or guard, right? Again, this searching implies that something's already lost, right? You can't search for something it's not found. And the same way, you can't guard something that's not under threat of being taken away. So you would think that the verse would perhaps be listed the other direction. It would be a time to lose things and time to find things, a time to get rid of things and a time to hold on to things. But he doesn't start like that. What King Solomon does, is starting with finding and starting with guarding, right? Keeping something under our control. So that's an interesting idea over here that he's doing, is that again he's starting with finding as opposed to losing. And again, as I would think losing would come first. My take on this is that, well, first of all, you see that the verse King Solomon here is assuming that items are in a state of danger to start off with, right? They're at risk of being lost or at risk of being thrown away, and therefore you need to go and search for them or guard them. So that's again, that's the direction I see him starting with over here. And I think what we have to take from this is that there are some things that start off lost. There are some endeavors that we take, some plans that we have that from the get-go, they're really lost. They're not a path towards success. So we from the very beginning, it's a lost cause, as we would say. And really, all of our plans could end up being a lost cause unless we do something to keep them going. If we have a plan, we want to see some sort of success from a certain area. We have to make a plan, but in order for that plan to not be a lost cause, we have to actively be searching for it. So there are times when we should be searching actively from the very beginning, before the item is lost, before the plan is a lost cause. We need to go and put extra effort into making sure that it is eit levakesh, there's a time to search things out. And at the same time, there are some things that maybe we should take account from the very beginning and realize this is not something that's in me to do. Okay. For example, you never want to tell somebody that they're not capable of doing something, right? That's not something you want to do. I used to teach some middle school students, and one of the scholarship organizations required the students to do a where will you be in 10 years from now, right? Essay, So I was helping them write the essay. I wasn't really an English teacher, but I was still helping them write the essay. There was at least one of the kids who said, where am I going to be for 10 years from now? I'm going to be in the NBA. That's it. I'm going to be a basketball player. And I didn't know what to do about this, because on one side, like, great, the kid has dreams. He wants to do that. I don't know if he's talented or not, but if that's what he wants to do, like, you don't want to squash a kid's dreams. But at the same time, you also don't want him to spend his entire teenage years, planning on being a basketball player when he's probably not going to end up as a basketball player. You would like him to have some sort of backup plan, right? Something. So I never figured out what was the appropriate response to that. And, unfortunately, it never got much farther than that. They sent in the essay, and that was the last I heard of it. But it is a question that's been bothering me ever since then, is how do you approach not just kids, friends, yourself, anything, right? You have a plan. I want to sit down and I want to, I want to go and climb Mount Everest, right? I don't, but let's say I did. Well, the amount of work that I have to put into that would be a life's work, really. And it's not to say that I can't do it, but it's a big task. And perhaps some of our causes are things that start off as lost. So there's a time to search out for those causes and say, you know what, this is a goal that's worth me putting in all that effort and going all the way through and making sure it gets done. And sometimes it's taking account and saying, that is not really an effort that's worth the amount of time and the amount of patience that I'm going to put into it. It's actually not going to get me what I'm hoping to get out of life. So there are causes that are from the get-go a lost cause. And sometimes you should put in all that effort, because really, again, human beings, God gives us amazing capabilities. We can accomplish unbelievable things, right? We've seen that in the past 100, 150 years, like tenfold, like that. There's been an explosion of the abilities of humankind to do things that were never thought to be possible. We don't think about it nowadays. We get on an airplane, but that wasn't the case not even that long ago. And so we have all these incredible abilities that God gave us and pathways that He opened to us to do. But we have to question, is this something that I should be spending my time on? And I think that's, again, another important path towards happiness, is recognizing what are those things, right? We got to devote ourselves to something. What are the causes that we should devote ourselves to, and our time and our effort and our money and our patience and our family's patience and all those things? And what are the things that, maybe this is a wild goose chase, and it's not really a step on my path towards happiness. So again, this is 3 lessons that we had so far in the last 3 verses. Verse 4 again told us that sometimes the things that bring you sadness are the things that bring you happiness. You got to sometimes give things time to evolve into happiness from sadness. And as Steve mentioned, also another idea that's brought out of there is that sometimes sadness is time to tell ourselves to stop, that the time for sadness is over and it's time to start picking ourselves up. That's verse 4. Verse 5 is that sometimes we have things in our life that don't have a clear use to them. We either gotta get rid of them or hold on to them. And same thing with relationships. Sometimes there's people who we either have to get rid of or hold on to. And we have to push ourselves in both directions and figure out what's the right thing in each case. And again, the third thing that we saw tonight is that with the big things, the big causes, we have to figure out, is this a lost cause to begin with? And should we be spending all our time doing it? Or is it actually something that's accomplishable, matches who I am, is really something that I will benefit from? In which case it's a time to search for it. It's a time to guard it and not let go of it and hold on to it all the way. So that's, again, chapter 3, verse 4, 5, and 6. And next week we should be finishing the times. There's only two more of those, and we will then get on with the rest of the text of Kohelet. Thank you all for joining me. I'm going to end the share. And all right, thank you very much. And feel free to log off. We'll see you again here next week, God willing.